All right, strap in, folks. This is going to be a spoiler review for Sinners, the 2025 horror, action, period piece thriller film written, produced, and directed by Ryan Coogler. So if you haven't seen that movie, watch it first, then come back, or just watch it if you want to be spoiled. But spoiler warning, second one, I'm going to start. So I gave this movie a 6 out of 10. Not a very strong score. I was expecting really good things from this film. The movie has a lot of hype. It's got, it was at 96% on Rottentomatoes, jump up to 99, back down to 98 at the time of this review. Same for the audience score. So that's basically saying like 98 to 99 people out of 100 like this film. So, and there's no reason why this film shouldn't be a good film either. This movie is directed by Ryan Coogler. He's done Fruitvale Station, which was okay. Creed, I consider Creed a really good movie. It's a spin-off, but it's just the camera work's really great, and you know, Michael B. Jordan's great. And then Black Panther I really enjoyed. Black Panther 1. I haven't seen Black Panther 2, but you know, Ryan Coogler chose to do that movie instead of Creed 2 or 3 for the money, obviously, and you know, for the challenge of doing another big budget action film. But he hasn't done horror, and that's probably one of the biggest gripes I had about the movie. The movie was not scary. First off, too much setup. There's a good 45 minutes to an hour of just characters talking about their backstories, ex-girlfriend stuff going on, characters being introduced, reintroduced. It almost felt like you're watching a heist film, and you need to like get the gang back together. We got our doorman, we got our piano man, we got our guitar man, we got our sign lady, we need the cook lady, we need this person. The movie probably could have been a better miniseries, to be honest. Kind of feel like if you could have stretched it out because there's so many characters. There's 9, not main characters, but 9 characters introduced as the forefront of the main ones. You know, you got your preacher boy, Samuel, and then you've got the Smokestack twins, and then you've got each of their ex-wife and ex-girlfriend. There's the voodoo mama, and then there's the Mary, and then you've got the Chinese couple, and then you've got Otis and Slim. So you're pretty much introducing all these characters. They're at the forefront. They're running this juke joint, and way too many characters for a movie. You got to cut that down by a little bit, and then you could have, you know, slowly trickled in more vampire action. I felt like the movie was really lacking in that. The introduction of Remick is a little bit confusing and short. This movie also has a lot of controversy because people wrote articles saying that the movie might not make its money back because it has a $90 million budget and only made about 61 in its first weekend, which is a little bit more than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which people are comparing for some reason because they have the same budget. But that movie's even longer. That movie's 2 hours, 40 minutes. That was also like in 2019, which alone had like 5 or 6 movies that made $1 billion. There was Captain Marvel, Endgame, Joker, Aladdin, maybe? I'm pretty sure, maybe not Aladdin, but you know what I mean. 2019 was a completely different year than 2025. It's a completely different market. People are waiting for streaming. People are not paying at all. People are just pirating. It's basically a completely different climate than it is then, but people were basically making it sound like the article was racist because they're comparing. But this movie does have a huge budget of $90 million. You need to make 180 just to break even, and you probably need to make another 50 or so to cover marketing. So that's like $230 million, and you're not even a third of the way there in your opening weekend. It has only been out for, you know, less than a week, but people are saying that the movie, you know, might not be as successful as it needs to be, and you know, it might be because the movie, in my opinion, is not that good. It's a little bit overrated. It's got way too much going on, and I feel like the director, he's in charge, right? Ryan Coogler, he produces the film, he directs it, he writes it. He produced it with a few others, but he had final say and final cut. So he decides ultimately what he wants to leave in. And I feel like he definitely wanted too much focus on the 9 characters. They should have at least put a little bit more effort into developing Remick as an antagonist. His introduction is very short. He literally is burning. He runs up to a house, cons the family into being invited. There's a couple. And then sundown happens, and then the people tracking him, there's some Choctaw that were trying to kill him, leave because they know he's dangerous. And he already bites someone. He bites Bert and then eventually Joan. So he now controls them. The movie also like doesn't really give you finite rules for how the control works, or if it does work, or what's going on. They're basically making it like a hive mind, which is what they started with, right? He bites Bert, then he bites Joan, or he has Bert bite Joan. The rules of this movie are really all over the place in terms of turning and vampires and who's in control, because it's like a virus. It doesn't just have to be Remick who bites someone to turn someone into a vampire. If any one of his flock bites someone, they also turn. But it makes it sound, okay, so the beginning of the film, there's 3 of them. And when they play a little song for the Smokestack Twins to try to be like, we want to go in there and play and buy drink and food and stuff, you know, we might be white, but we got money. They act in a way that's almost like a hive mind. It's very creepy. It's definitely done on purpose. You know, no characters talk over each other. They take turns. They almost feel like one being. You know, Remick is there, and the 2 of them are puppets of sorts, and they play like perfectly in sync. And I think Bert and Joan, they're not supposed to have accents, but maybe they do have Irish accents because he has one. And so you're basically setting it up that he controls them. It's like a hive mind. But then he comes back later after he bites Mary, and then he controls her. So she bites Stack, and he escapes too. And then they bite Otis and a drunk man. And then there's a whole bunch of them. He literally comes back, I guess. There's maybe a couple that left by car, but anyone who left by walking probably got bit, or anyone around the area got bit. They become part of the flock. So you're just assuming that all of them are under his control, and they all want to turn more people. That's what Remick wants, and that's what he's making all of the turned people do. They try to tempt them by saying, like, join us, you know, this is freedom. We're going to be one big happy family, one big new species. You know, weak theme for starters. But one of the ending of the movie, the mid-credit scene, we find out that Stack and Mary survived the final encounter. They ran off instead of following. So it doesn't make any sense how they had autonomy, but the rest of the flock didn't. You could explain that maybe Stack wanted to bite Smoke, but he had the juju bag on him, so he couldn't. And that maybe gave him his autonomy, but then how did Mary get her autonomy? So the 2 of them run off, apparently, and they just survive sundown, basically, and or sunrise. And then they show up later, like 30, 40 years later, to talk to the last survivor and tempt him with a mortal life, but it doesn't sway Samuel. So that doesn't make sense. So, like, one of the things that would be a problem in other vampire media, and the rules you create, is that if you make too many vampires, it's a bad thing because you can't stop it. And then there's not enough blood to go around because, you know, at the beginning of the film, it was him by himself. He supposedly had a wife, maybe, or he had a flock of his own, but they got killed. That could have been a cool action sequence right there for episode 1 or 2. And then he starts making a new flock. But by the middle of the film, he's got like 20 people outside, and they're all part of it. And every time those people bite someone, they create more and more of his flock. And they don't really explain if he has less control, if more people are bitten or anything like that. They just feel like they're all his puppets. But they do let the remaining people inside the juke joint know that when he bites someone, he gets their memories, and it's like a hive mind shared. So he gets a lot of knowledge. That's why he wants to bite Samuel. He wants to have his singing and ability and music ability by biting him. And they really don't explain how Stack and Mary were able to sort of, because they don't have their own autonomy, right? Or else you'd have 20 vampires confused going like, what's going on? Why do we have to go after these people? I'm scared. I don't want to be here. Instead, they have a drunken man. So there's a drunken man. He's found in the juke joint after the Mary attacks Stack. And they think he's like bleeding or dead. So they pick him up, they throw him outside. They find out he was just drunk. And so before they can let him back in, he gets attacked by Otis. Otis bites his neck. He literally turns right there, gets up and smiles, and he's with them. So it's almost like it's a hive mind kind of thing. And they even ask, like, hey, if we kill the main vampire, will it free the others and turn them back? They won't turn them back, but they get to exist. But they don't really explain the autonomy thing because, for example, another twist is that Bert and Joan are a KKK couple. They're part of the Klan, and Remick found out, so he found out that they're going to be attacked. The juke joint's going to be attacked in the morning no matter what, even if it's successful or not, or if the vampires are there or not. So he offers them a chance for power. So this is something that they should have explored a little bit. They should have had vampirism be a sort of metaphor for power. It's something that he also missed a chance to have Mary do. Something that happens with Mary is that her mother died off screen. She apparently was a great friend to the Smokestack twins, and they weren't around for the funeral. But she's grieving. Mary's still grieving. That's why she's seeking out Stack, and she basically has a scene where she's supposed to talk to Remick and Bert and Joan to find out if they have any money. And they try to comfort her, and almost like a cult, they try to like get her. You know, they try to like insinuate that, you know, you can join us, you can, and that's something they could have tempted her with, that if they had more time and more screen time to develop, it could have been an interesting avenue to sort of explore. Because one of the reasons why Mary and Stack can't be together is because he's afraid that she'll be used to get to him. You know, he's a dangerous gangster, he's got lots of enemies, you know, gangster enemies and racist enemies, and they're afraid that, you know, she'll come to harm if they're together. So he's basically like, I won't have you with me, I won't take that risk. So if, you know, you knew about this and you offered her a chance to be immortal and also have super strength to a certain degree and be unkillable except for being in daylight, that would be a pretty good thing to tempt someone. Instead though, Remick just takes her by force, and it kind of takes away that dramatic heft, because he just basically just bites her anyway, and then she goes, I'm a vampire, but I want to bite others. It's not like she wants to turn Stack so that they can be together. You know, it'd be like more of a temptation thing. It'd be more, you know, Sinners. It's supposed to be like a juicy kind of thing, you know, but instead it's more of a primal urge to just spread the virus, and that's kind of boring because you can't tempt people to being a vampire. There's a scene where Remick does tempt them, but they don't want it because of the voodoo mama lady. She basically just says, it's not good, don't do it. But, you know, they're going to be attacked by the KKK. It would have been a completely different movie if they just allowed themselves to join the vampires and then they went after the KKK. That would have been a way more interesting sort of movie, theme-wise, plot-wise, because, you know, you have the racism there, but then what happens if you add a supernatural edge to it? You know, what if racism can't defeat vampirism or something like that? You could also have, you could have made Remick goes over and kills all of the KKK and recruits them all to be vampires, and they basically are his slaves, and he doesn't care about race. He wants more vampires of any kind. Racist, white, black, whatever. That would be an interesting thing to explore too. Or you could have had Remick be, since he's Irish, the Smokestack twins apparently robbed the Irish of their beer and the Italians of their wine to pit them against each other so that they could then go back to where they came from, so they could start the juke joint. So what if Remick was a gangster? He was a vampire gangster sent to like get revenge because they're sinners, you know. See, all of these other story potentials could happen. So there's a lot you could do with this concept, and the movie just doesn't really feel that it's going in any interesting way. There's simply a lot of melodrama and not enough time to explore all of these characters, especially the Chinese couple. They basically are there only because of the money, but then Remick threatens her daughter, so she basically gets impatient and wants to kill them all and says, come on in, and then they get massacred. And obviously the power levels are all over the place too, because Stack, he gets turned into a vampire and he's stuck in the closet, and he's like, let me out, and they won't do it. But then he ends up pushing the door down anyway and escaping. So the vampires do have increased strength. So at the end, when there's like 40 of them versus like 5 or 6, it should be pretty much a moot point to fight back. So the vampires are too overpowered for starters. And let's talk about the musical numbers. The music is obviously really interesting because that's sort of the thing that attracts Remick. But I feel that's like a really bad motivation. You know, Remick just sort of walks by doing his own thing. Also, his introduction doesn't make sense either. They should have had more time to show that he had his own flock and maybe they were sleeping and then they got attacked by the Indians and then he barely escaped with his own life. They also established that maybe he can't just be killed by sunlight because he's horrifically burned in his introductory scene, but at the end he's stabbed through the heart and burned, so that kills him. So maybe he's really that powerful that just sunlight wouldn't even be able to kill him. He'd have to stay out there for a while. And then he ends up tricking that couple and turning them anyway. So, you know, they really doesn't get much time. There's a really creepy scene where they're doing like Irish folk dancing, but then they turn it into a whole sequence, which takes away some of its power. Yeah, there's not enough scenes with the vampires, to be honest, and there's not enough world building with them, to be honest, to make it like a big threat. Also, you know, the voodoo mama, she basically is just there for exposition. She is obviously Smoke's ex-wife, but she basically knows all this stuff about vampires, calls them vampires. There's like this weird air of jokey black comedy after she says that, and they have a scene that homages The Thing. I guess the movie just, you know, it promised one thing and gave you another. It promised a bloody, intense thrill ride, gangsters versus vampires. Not really that hard of a thing to do. But then what you get is 45 minutes of melodrama about how hard it is to be a black person having a business. You've got all this backstory, you've got all this stuff going on. You know, these two guys playing it fast and loose. And then you introduce a vampire haphazardly, really, and then he just sort of stumbles by because of the music, which there's a really interesting musical sequence that happens in the middle of the film where Samuel gets so into singing, it's transcendent to the point where like the past, the present, and the future converges in that moment. So they have like a DJ there and a electric guitar man and a African woman dancing with a mask. They have a Chinese opera singer dancing. They have ballerina. They have rappers. They have hip hop guys. They have all this stuff, and it was an interesting choice. I didn't hate this scene, to be honest. Thought this part of the film was really interesting because they're basically trying to showcase how transcendent this music was, to the point where it would capture the attention of any evil being, including Remick. So it's just kind of a coincidence that he just kind of showed up and he's like, ooh, I like this music. I'll stop what I'm doing, you know, spreading a plague for no reason just to try to get that or whatever. And weak motivation for him, basically. Let's talk about the KKK sequence. So basically after the events of the vampire attack, what happens is Samuel and Smoke are the only survivors. They basically killed the vampire guy, Remick. He was stabbed through the heart with a stake, burned. When sunrise came up, his entire flock died except for Stack and Mary. And they have a choice to do. Samuel can go do ministry work with his father, or he can go live his own life, being a musician, doing whatever. And then Smoke remembers that the KKK are coming because he was warned. So he buries the Tommy gun, gets a sniper rifle out, and a good 15 to 20 guys show up wanting to kill all the black people there. They're not there. He manages to wound most of them, kill most of them. I think he actually kills all of them, but he gets shot instead as well. So it's kind of like a sad thing. He reunites with the baby that he had, and basically, yeah. Felt the stuff with the baby was a little bit awkward. They should have played around with the vampire stuff more. Like, would it be worth trading your eternal soul for more power? Because a lot of the trailer segments are, the quotable lines. A lot of the good dialogue scenes or the monologues are used in the trailer, so they don't have as much power when you're listening to them in the movie. Stuff like, you play with the devil, he's gonna follow you home, or I don't care about ghosts, I don't care about demons, I don't care about magic, all I know is power, and like all those cool lines are kind of like on the nose. They are cool sounding, but they're kind of spoiled by the trailer. And if I had to decide what the best parts of the movie were that I liked, I guess I would have to say the direction's pretty solid, but it's not claustrophobic or scary or done in a way that's horror. And I did like Jack O'Connell. He played it really Irish. He was creepy when he's glowing. At the end, he's got like longer fingers. He really needed more character development, but he was really creepy in the short role. I honestly thought it was the guy from Game of Thrones, the actor who played Ramsay Bolton at first, but it was Jack O'Connell, just with the longer hair. And a good role for Burton Jones as well. I just feel like the KKK part was a little bit not needed. You know, obviously, it's very Tarantino-esque. That's why I mentioned him earlier. Tarantino's not against having an exploitative scene, though. You know, like in, was it in Django, they had the KKK get shot. You know, he had racists get shot, slave owners, plantations get shot. Nazis get shot in Inglourious Basterds. So the KKK are fair game. You know, they show up after the fact, after the carnage. So they're a bit of an afterthought, and they are still a threat. But they should have found a way to make it more organically apply with the vampire stuff going on. Like, would these two brothers become vampires just so they could kill their enemies, all future enemies? Because that would be a cool way, like a Temptation sort of theme where, you know, Stack is afraid that Mary's going to get killed if, you know, they date or they're publicly together. Interracial marriage or dating is bad. So, you know, would they find themselves a little bit more bold or a lot more powerful and, you know, basically unkillable at night? That would be a really... Same with Smoke, because he's got the juju bag and he's obviously sad and stuff, but he's also like always trying to take care of his brother, and they've got, you know, two mafias after them as well as the KKK. So you'd think that he would be okay with being a vampire, just, you know, as a theme of power, as a theme of, you know, I'm pretty awesome, I've fought in a war, I have skills, I have money, I can take care of myself, but, you know, I'm still gotta sleep. You know, you're still vulnerable, you're not bulletproof. Being bulletproof would be pretty awesome if you're living in like a rough 30s and you're a gangster and you're afraid of someone mowing you down with a Tommy gun at any time. You basically would have an edge being a vampire. So that for me was one of the bigger reasons why I didn't like the film. You still get your meat and potatoes in terms of vampire action, but it's definitely lacking a cohesion of sorts with any themes of racism or you know, fighting for power or outrunning your past. The vampire themselves are a supernatural threat, only physically really, but they should have been more of a temptation of the spirit, of your morality. You know, it would have been interesting to see them all take the deal willingly or change the rules of the vampire so that you can only be changed if you're bitten by Remick or something. If you're bitten by one of the others, you're just like a mindless drone. But that would have been a really interesting, cool thing. And they obviously could have explored that in a TV show. I keep mentioning that, but it's true. There's just too much going on. You've got them fleeing the Chicago Mafia, two kinds. You've got the KKK in the present day, and you got the vampires in the future. So too much going on. But I can also understand that this is Ryan Coogler's kind of like big step forward for his filmmaking career. You know, he did start with something really low budget with Fruitvale Station. He got a big hit with Creed and then two big Marvel films. This is like his baby. It's like his kind of, it's not his Megalopolis, but it's very similar where he's putting up a lot of his own money, probably, because he's producing. And he's going to go for broke. He's not going to be timid and be like, well, I'll just make a generic sort of vampires versus gangsters, have them shoot them down and blah, blah, blah. He wanted to do something a lot more bold with a lot more culture and music and the highs and lows of a black life and you know, racial trauma and other things like that. And it didn't all quite work, though. You know, you still have to give people the thrilling, gory, intense thrill ride that the trailers offered. And if you don't do that, then you're just sort of dicking around and, you know, having your cathartic KKK getting shot, but it doesn't really mean anything because all the characters are dead, basically. Comes a certain point where you have to make everything kind of stick together, and if you got three different plot lines happening and not a good theme of racism to intertwine with the vampirism, then they're basically just, you know, you could change this to werewolves and it wouldn't change the movie. In fact, it would just, yeah, it wouldn't change anything, to be honest, if you change the creature. So I think that's pretty bad. You need to intertwine it more. thematic wise, and because all the right elements are there. Like, Ryan Coogler is a really good director. You know, Creed, some of those boxing sequences are amazing, and Black Panther as well. So he can direct action. He just doesn't have an eye for horror. He doesn't. A lot of. Okay, so something that happens a lot in this movie, they cut away. They don't show Bert being bitten. They don't show Joan being bitten. They don't show Mary being bitten. They don't show Otis being. It's not like I want a bite fest, but a lot of this stuff is happening off screen. You don't have to. It's rated R. You can have throats bit out and stuff, and you can have people running through the forest being jumped by things. You don't have to, infer that they're being bitten off screen. You can show that. Also, a lot of characters do the whole telling and not showing, like, oh man, you were in the war, or my mom died. She mentions that like 2-3 times. Same with being in the war and, taking care of themselves, or like, watching out for themselves and things like that. A lot of exposition in the dialogue over and over. And another thing, the Smokestack twins, at first you might not be able to differentiate them by their hats, but there were multiple times where characters are, they say their name over, like, oh, hey Stack, hey Smoke, where's Smoke, where's Stack? And they're basically, people don't say the names that often. It's a little awkward in terms of dialogue too. So it's not just that, just all the right elements are there. You've got a game cast. You've got Michael B. Jordan doing double duty, a solid director with Ryan Coogler. You've got the money, $90 million budget, hefty, a little bit shorter in budget than like something like Mickey 17, which is also done by Warner Brothers. So you have all the right elements there. You got Jack O'Connell, good villain. I think you just needed to, round up the story a little bit more. I did mention Megalopolis. See, Francis Ford Coppola spent $110 million of his own money making that movie. He made this super-sized, super long, pretentious sci-fi drivel, but it's his money. He can do what he wants. And Ryan Coogler could do the same thing, but when you are the final boss and you get to have final say, you got to be careful not to get too weird and too artsy and too different, because at the end of the day, you still have to make money. You still have to make a product that people want to watch and see. And if you make it a little bit too obtuse, or you skimp on, vampire development to have more black people at the forefront, you're going to suffer in terms of the horror department. You got to film the movie like a horror film too. You can't just have vampires show up and be like, this is scary because his eyes are glowing. It's like, no, you need to show him a little bit more, show him, like the terrors of being alone and having your throat ripped out or whatever. But I don't know, the movie just didn't hit the right notes for me, and it's not a bad thing. The movie's very original, and it's very unique, and it's the director's ambition and vision, and it's all there. But I felt like it didn't come together in quite the right way. So that's my spoiler review for Sinners.